Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this new webinar by Severalnines. It's good to have you with us. The topic today is on managing MySQL replication for high availability. As you can see from the cover slide, this topic today, and my colleague Krzysztof is going to walk us through the topic, and also in conjunction with a demo. So you'll have both. The theory and some practical demo as well. On the next slide, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jean-Jérôme, and I'm with the Severalnines team as well. I'll be your host today for today's webinar. If you have any questions during the next hour, whether it's on the content or maybe on the system we're using, feel free to ask them in the question section of your control panel, and we'll be happy to answer them there. Or also we'll have some time for questions probably towards the end of the session. If you want to continue then the conversation or have some further questions afterwards, feel free to email me directly at jj@severalnines.com, and I'll be sure to help you after the webinar with whatever requests you may have. So that's just in terms of introductions. Before we get started with the actual topic, and before I hand over to my colleague Krzysztof, I wanted to ask all of you to begin with a quick question. And this is to see whether you're currently using or are planning to use MySQL replication in your own organization, just to get an idea of maybe also the reason for your participation today. So whether you're currently using MySQL application or not, or whether you're planning to use it within the next few months. It'd be great to get your feedback on that. And once everyone has a chance to participate here in this poll, I'll share the results, of course, so we can all see the status of what everyone is doing today with MySQL application. So thanks for your participation. I'm just going to close this now and share the results. Great. So it looks like the vast majority of you are already using MySQL application. So that's a nice, great basis for the discussion today. And then the rest of you are looking to implement or to get started with MySQL application soon. So that's also good to see. Krzysztof, any comments on this before you take over?
I think that's pretty expected. MySQL application is very popular, and it's a very nice tool to scale and to implement high availability. So I hope that even those who are running MySQL application setups will still benefit from this webinar.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating, and I'll hand over to you now, Krzysztof.
Okay, so thank you, JJ. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krzysztof Książek, as JJ said, and I'll be talking today about MySQL application and how to manage the MySQL application. So today's agenda, we will start with a short demo about MySQL application and how you can manage it using the ClusterControl. We will cover deployment, topology changes, and we'll take a look at the most important metrics and this data information that you can find in the ClusterControl. We will talk about dealing with schema changes and topology changes, a pretty common problem, and something that's DBAs and people using MySQL application need to take care and handle on a even sometimes daily basis. And we will conclude by talking about discussing potential issues in MySQL application. But first, let's say a few words about MySQL application itself. So it's available since, like always, was introduced in MySQL 3.23. So it's been years ago. It's a proven, it's a robust solution based on binary logs. So the binary logs events are being transferred from the master to slaves using binary logs. In MySQL 5.6, few enhancements have been introduced. Among others, global transaction ID. In general, GTID means that each transaction that's being written to the master or to any node receives its own identification, its own ID. It makes much easier to implement some of the maintenance operations, right? Because you have this data. In 5.6 also another feature has been added. I'm talking about multi-threaded replication. In 5.6 it was multi-threading based on schemas. So if you had multiple schemas and you were writing to all of them, you could benefit from some level of parallelization. It has been vastly improved in 5.7, where additional new way of parallelizing this write has been added. I'm talking about logical clock type of parallelization. And right now, using 5.7, even those who use single schema or who are writing mainly to one single schema, they still can benefit to some extent from the multi-threaded replication. MySQL application can be asynchronous or semi-synchronous. With asynchronous, things are pretty simple. So you write to the master, you commit the query, and then you keep fingers crossed that some of the slaves will get this transaction before master crashes. In semi-synchronous replication, things are slightly different. In this case, you have a guarantee that at least one of the slaves stored this particular transaction that you are about to commit on persistent storage. It doesn't mean that the slave applied it, so it may still happen that the slave is lagging like hours, but this data is safe because it has been stored on this persistent storage. And all those things, the things that is proven robust, it's easy to set up, and all those features make MySQL application, a backbone of majority of large MySQL deployments. And by large, I mean deployments like Facebook, Twitter, Booking.com, Dropbox, GitHub. So these are really large setups. These are really large deployments, and they, among others, use MySQL application because of its user friendliness, I would say. So let's talk about MySQL application and ClusterControl. How ClusterControl can help you managing MySQL application. So in this demo, I'm going to show deployment process. So I will deploy a master. I will add a slave to the master. We will promote the slave, and we will recover or rebuild slave from the data from the master. And I will be showing some of the monitoring features and the trending and the metrics that you can find interesting while handling MySQL application. And this demo, it will be a kind of a back and forth between the demo itself and the slides, because some of the steps that I will be taking themselves will take a little time. So in order not to waste time by looking at the screen, we'll be just switching back and forth between the demo and the slide deck. So okay, let's start with the. I will rearrange it slightly. So let's start with empty cluster control. No cluster is defined. We are going to create a database node, and we'll pick MySQL Application Master. For today, we will use Percona Server 5.6. It is possible to deploy Oracle 5.7 using ClusterControl. But the problem here is that ClusterControl leverages extra backup as a tool to provision slaves, to rebuild slaves. And as of now, extra backup still does not support 5.7. Therefore, to show, to demo those features, we are going to stick to Percona Server 5.6. So I'm going to grab myself an IP. So I'm filling host name, I'm setting some password. And of course, you have to have SSH connectivity ready between the ClusterControl host and the nodes that you're going to add. I have this prepared, so I'm just typing my SSH user. You could deploy semi-sync replication. For now, let's stick to regular one. And with repository, there are a couple of options you can pick from. So default repository, it just means that the default upstream repository will be created. So in this case, we'll create a configuration for Percona repositories. Internal repository means that that the ClusterControl won't make any changes in your apt or yum setups. So it will just assume that all of the packages are reachable and available using whatever you have set in your configs. And if not, then the deployment will fail, of course. And one more option here is create a new repository, local mirrored repository. And by using this option, the ClusterControl will create a mirror at this point of time of in this case, Percona repository. This is something you might find it useful if you want to stick to a single version of MySQL along the whole life cycle of the cluster. Because when the default repositories, new versions may be added and ClusterControl will install new versions. And if you want to stick to this particular version, you can create a mirror and it will stay like that. But for now, let's go with default repository. So the Percona repositories will be created. So I'm going to deploy it, and basically the job has started. So as you can see, the SSH access is being checked, and then the packages are being installed right now. Some helper packages which are useful and important and needed in order for either ClusterControl to handle some operations or for MySQL itself. So this step will take a little while. So I'm going to go back to our slides and let's talk about deployment scenarios for the replication, because, well, we are just deploying a replication topology.